Wise words are like arrows flung at your forehead. What do you do? Why, you duck, of course. Witness. Me review House of Chains in depth. For those of you who are not familiar, my name is Izzy, and for the last 3 Malazan books, I have been doing a in-depth review of what I thought about each book. So if you see this video and you have not read House of Chains by Steven Erikson, the 4th book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, please do not watch this one. I have one that is completely and utterly spoiler-free up on my channel right now. The link, I mean, it's not hard to find. It was literally like the last video I made. But if you have read House of Chains and you want to listen to someone who is just like the most ordinary dude ever try and talk about House of Chains, then I'm your guy. So let me get straight into it because there's a lot to cover. Now, typically, I have in the past gone into like almost excruciating detail, re-summarizing everything that has happened in each Malazan book. And while I have a ton of notes of everything that has happened in House of Chains, I'm not gonna do that. Mostly because I don't really like talking for 45 minutes without interruption. And I kind of want to be able to talk about it with spoilers, of course, in a more succinct manner. So if I miss something or I skip over an important part, please forgive me, but I'm trying something just a little bit different. I want to talk about this book more generally and then kind of dive into the specifics of parts that I really liked or the parts that didn't quite hit for me. So again, I'm trying something different. If you guys prefer the other format, please let me know. I'll do it that way instead. But let me get just straight into it. House of Chains starts off kind of weird. And the reason it starts off weird for me is because this prologue introduces us to they're not necessarily a new race by name, but a new set of people who we're not very familiar with Trolsengar, who is this Tist Idor, who is sentenced by his people to be erased from their memories for not committing a crime. And as of right now, I'm currently reading Midnight Tides, which explains how he got there in the first place. I still don't know the answer to that and why he was sentenced the way that he was. But yeah, this prologue compared to like Memories Vice, Dead House Gates, and even Gardens of the Moon, I thought was really weak. Mostly just because it's pretty short by comparison. Not a lot happens, and then you know we just transition to a completely other place. There's not a lot to talk about in the prologue. I do like Trolsengar. I liked his storyline throughout this, and I'll probably hit on the few points where I really vibed with it. But overall, compared to some of the other plot lines, which I'll get into briefly, not my favorite. He was a good character, just not my favorite in this book. And then part 1 happens. And I will say immediately, for those of you who have seen my spoiler-free review, this will not surprise you. Part 1 for this book is my favorite section in this entire book. I think it is the strongest part 1, book 1, whatever you want to call it, in any of the Malazan books so far. And I think it's the strongest section in this entire book. And of course, who else could it be but our great chieftain, our blood god, Karsa Orlong. This dude, Steven Erikson must have had a really, really good time writing this guy because he is so fun to read. I know a lot of people really hate Karsa, mostly because at the beginning of this book, he is a like objectively evil piece of garbage. But for me, I can always 110% get behind a character who is just there to mess stuff up. I mean, this reminded me of like when I read like Conan the Barbarian in high school. Like that was the vibe I felt, where Steve Erikson, at least from what I understand, had been critiqued by people because, he often jumps around from point of view to point of view to point of view, and people were giving him pushback by saying, oh yeah, well, obviously you don't know how to just stay with one character for any period of time. And this was his response to that. And oh man, were they wrong, because Steven Erikson and his writing with Karsa Orlong, I think, is some of the best characterization that this entire series has had to offer so far. I mean, a lot happens in this first section, but to summarize, from my understanding and from my memory, which is shoddy at best, so please forgive me, Karsa and his two friends are basically trying to take their tribe, these Teblor, and bring back the glory days by going out and murdering other people because they devote their lives to these gods who are incredibly cruel and kind of like feast on destruction and mayhem. And he's doing all this because his grandpa used to be like the big cheese back in the day, and his dad is just a loser, and his dad is like, oh, but like killing children's bad. So Karsa and his buddies are like, first off, old man, wrong, killing children's based, and secondly, like, we're going to go out and we're going to regain our glory. We're going to go out and make sure our tribe feels powerful. And I don't know, like, it's just, this entire section is really fun because at first you're like, okay, this feels weird that this is like, it felt weird in this because, first of all, I'm used to point of view switching. Second of all, we are following just an objectively bad person. And somehow, Steven Erikson makes me want to like root for the guy, despite just being like, thinking his actions are completely despicable. Like, there's something about Karsa Orlong and his like charisma and the way he talks, especially done by the narrator who did House of Chains. I'm gonna forget his name at the moment, but like his Karsa Orlong was just so fun to like listen to, because he's like, witness, I am going to kill everybody in this village by myself. I, Karsa Orlong, so swear. And I don't know, like that is just like a really, really fun character to me to read about. Like, I'm all for it. So like, I love this first section, and the fact that he just goes out and starts killing people. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, they just sow destruction across the Teblor people and the Lowlanders and the humans and everyone else. I mean, they are messing things up. They are screwing people. And it is bloody and it's fun. And this entire section is just really great. And I really like the fact that Karsa and his allies, his two friends, really get their comeuppance in this first section. Because at first you're like, oh, nobody's like standing in their way. Like, nobody can stop these three. These three are great warriors. And then both of Karsa's companions die. Like, they just expire. And then Karsa is enslaved. And then he frees himself. And then he gets trapped again by the Malazans. And then, he ends up in a war. And then, Karsa then, kills the people who we saw in Deadhouse Gates. And then he escapes the warren. And then Karsa is then again imprisoned. And this entire time he is having like this actualization that, hey, his actions in the past of following his gods and believing that, everyone who isn't a part of his tribe deserve to die or are less than him is maybe morally questionable at best, is just something really great to see. And then you get to see him continue that journey throughout the story. And as those points happen, I will talk about them. But I really think Karsa is one of those characters where it's like he starts off as like a completely morally black character, and then he slowly but surely becomes more and more morally gray. He's not a good person by the end of the story, but he's a better person. And that transformation to me was the most powerful thing this book had to offer. I just loved it. And the way that he meets Leo Man and just gets kind of trapped into the whirlwind and sucked in to be one of Shaik's protectors that we saw in Deadhouse Gates, like, that was just really cool. Like, this entire section was just really, really well done. And I think it shows how great and diverse Steven Erikson is as a writer. Now, the next two sections were really the part of House Chains where I struggled with the most. So I'll just get straight into it, right? First of all, with Cold Iron, which is the second book of House of Chains, we are introduced to basically all of these new Malazans who are under the command of Tavaray, who is Ganos Perron's sister. She is the new adjunct for the Empress Lysine, right? And I love the Malazans. Specifically, I love the Bridge Burners. So going into it, I expected to feel some sort of connection, but I really didn't. This section specifically was a lot of sitting around and talking camp politics and talking about how they're going to deal with the whirlwind and who's going to be in charge of what unit and what army and why these things are happening and why there's these internal camp politics or whatever. And, you know, there are characters who make their reappearance here, like Stormy, Fiddler, Kalam, I think, makes his reappearance in this section. Not that he's with them, he has a completely different story going on. I'll talk about that in a second. But like, all of it to me, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't care. I did not care about the Malazans under Tavaray. I mean, I cared about Fiddler, and there were a few sections where I was like, yeah, I enjoyed reading it, but overall, the Malazan plot line throughout this, like the Malazan Marine plot line, the Tavaray plot line, if you will, to me just wasn't very convincing. I'll talk more about how that is resolved and why, to me, it was underwhelming. But for right now, I'm gonna put a pin in that so I can talk about our boy Kalam. Kalam and his wife, whose name I'm not going to remember because I did not write it down, because she does not show up in this book at all, is now kind of working with Coltane and Shadow Throne in order to do some setup to take down the Whirlwind Goddess and Shaik. And I mean, this is just following Kalam specifically, very good time. No qualms about his storyline at all. I remember distinctly he eventually goes into this like fortification that is besieged by some like whirlwind outriders or whatever, and they have like a demon or something in this well, and I don't know why this has stuck with me so much, but it has. Like, he goes down to like check it out, and like the demon or whatever tries to like kill him, and because it's like hungry, and it's like, I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat you, and he's just like, oh yeah, eat this, and he stabs it, and I don't know why, but it like really made me laugh. Like the line delivery to me was like genius. I don't know why, but I just really need to say that I love Kalam. I thought he dropped probably the funniest line in this entire book, and there's nothing bad to say about Kalam at all. Also, what happened, and I think that may have happened in the third section, I don't really remember, but I just remember it distinctly happening at some point in this book and me really liking it. Also, what else happened in Cold Iron is that we get to see Crocus and Apsalar. And I will say again, this is a plot line I could get behind, because Crocus and Apsalar have been these almost background characters for the last like 3 books. And now they finally get to step up and make themselves serious characters in the story. And their entire plot line here of working for Coltane and defending the Throne of Shadow, to me, just worked really well. I thought it was very well done. Their entire dynamic feels very almost like Shakespearean tragic, because these two characters are so obviously in love with one another, but neither of them understand how to love the other because they have been so fundamentally changed by the things that have happened in their lives. Absalor was possessed by a god, an assassin god. Cutter is trying, Crocus, Cutter, whatever you want to call him, is trying very hard to make it work with her by becoming a more efficient assassin. And it's just not working out, and he's trying, but everything he does is failing. But yeah, their entire plot line is really well done, and I pretty much just summarized the entire thing. I think they're very, very cool characters to follow. And I feel bad for Crocus, because I too understand what it's like to be a young man and in love with a woman you don't understand. We've all been there, buddy. You'll get it next time. No, but seriously, it is a really kind of fun plot line to follow. Moving on from there, we get some more Karsa moments where he is talking to, I guess, his friends who are now ghosts. And he decides, hey, this whirlwind thing, I need to figure my own stuff out, because my journey is not yet done. So Karsa talks to his ghost friends, and I'm not really sure what happens here, but he leaves the whirlwind with his ghost friends and decides to go and basically fulfill what his gods have been wanting him to do for the last several years. And the reason he does this is basically just to middle finger them later on. It's pretty epic. I'll get to that later, but yeah, every moment that Karsa is the point of view, I'm having a good time. I'm having a very, very good time. There is also the Troll and Onrak plotline, where they are going through, I think the Tist Idor Warren. Somebody's gonna correct me on that. I don't really remember. And they kind of just have this whole wild journey of these two very different races and two very different men slowly become friends over the course of this book, and very trusting of one another, and they kind of are trying to follow these rogue Talon Imas, who are actually, if I understand correctly, the gods that Karsa has been worshiping, because it turns out the Teblor gods are formerly Talon Imas, who are working for the chained god. I think I got that right. I actually think I nailed that. And their plot lines, it's fine. It's just there. I'm not really sure what happened during that plot line. I was kind of checked out for that one, if I'm gonna be honest. They had some fun moments, but a lot of it is just them walking around talking about the Warrens of Darkness and all these different concepts that, to me, over my head. Just gonna be honest, guys. Just gonna be honest, flying over my head, because I have not a clue what they're talking about. It was just, for me, the plot line that I was I'm not gonna say the least interested in, but the hardest to follow, because I didn't know what was going on. Moving on from that, some more stuff happens. We get, and I already mentioned this, we get Cutter, Crocus, and Absalor to the moving island where this Throne of Shadow is. And they have this whole fight scene, and I really like it. I actually really, really like the fight scenes in this book. I think the action in every Malazan book is very, very well done. And House of Chains is no exception to that rule. But yeah, that's pretty much, from the Something Breathe section, the stuff I really remember. That, And the Teblor gods tell... Oh, I have to mention this. I have to, because it just came back into my mind. There is another plotline that I've completely forgotten about until this point, because I forced it out of my memory, and that is the Whirlwind plotline. And the Whirlwind plotline is, to me, the least interesting plotline out of all of them, because essentially the Whirlwind plotline is all about camp politics and how there are these different factions who are working to usurp Shaik, Fellison the Older, whatever you want to call her, and her power, because they think they can control the goddess or the army better than her, because she's being consumed by the whirlwind goddess and going nuts, because she just cares about revenge and nothing else. And because of that, there's this character named Bidethal, who is just this absolute scumbag. I mean, he is a piece of garbage, and he is, if I remember correctly, working for the crippled god as well in order to basically force his internal misery and trauma onto everyone around him, because he's a pathetic piece of garbage, right? And one of the things he does is and I'm going to try and say this in a way that YouTube does not ban me, he mutilates women in the camp. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows that this guy's a creep. And the only reason that this man is still living and breathing for the majority of this story, surprise, he ends up dying, he gets his comeuppance, is just because of his position against these other factions within the Whirlwind camp, because he knows that I guess he knows the conspiracy of what's going on, and that's why he remains in power. That's why Shaik, Fellison, whoever you want to name her, is keeping him around, and everyone knows it. And I totally understand what Erikson is going for. I understand that Erikson is saying, hey, there is evil in the world that we all collectively tolerate because it's convenient for us. I understand what he's going for, but I will tell you right now that the entire sequence of what Fellison the Younger goes through made me incredibly uncomfortable, and it's probably one of the reasons I really just did not like this plotline, because I understand, and end of the day, this is a fictional story. These things are not happening to real people. But I always get very uncomfortable when that kind of stuff happens to young people in any setting, even though I fully acknowledge that Steven Erikson is completely right. We tolerate evil far too much in our daily lives. We really should be more objective about, hey, this is evil that I'm seeing in my community, or this is evil that I'm benefiting from and I need to take a stand. I completely agree with that point of view. I completely understand what Steven Erikson is doing here. And hats off for him handling it the way he did, but it made me very uncomfortable. And when he dies, when Bidethal dies, dude, I was pumped. I mean, I was pumped. So, very good section, very good writing, but man, it made me not want to read the Whirlwind plotline, because I just hate characters like that. I hate that they get any credit at all. I hate that there is even a minute, within the context of the book, reason why this man is still living and breathing. I just hate him. I just hated him so much, and I'm glad that he died choking on his own parts. Like, that was sick. That was great. That's why Karst is the go-to of this book. Continuing. I was ranting there for a second. Karsa goes out. He claims his horse, which was his plot line, I guess, during the middle of this book. And he forges this sword that is made of stone. It's actually a Talani mass sword. And he then, cuts one of his gods in half because they appeared in the flesh. and he's like, guys, I just want to make it really, really clear that I am not in any way supporting you. And if you want me to be the knight for the House of Chains, I'm not going to do that. The crippled god has made a severe mistake, because I will no longer be bound by anyone. I'm just going to do my own thing from here on out. And I hope you're happy with your decision that you've made. And obviously, I don't know what the repercussions of all these actions are going to be long term, but I don't think Karsa is exactly going to be on the crippled god's side when it comes to the end game. I don't think I'm going to get to the crippled god, the 10th book of the series, and Karsa is going to be like, yeah, but we should like listen to this guy. We should listen to this nut job who wants to like kill and torture everyone. So that was really cool. I really cannot emphasize enough how much I liked the Karsa plotline throughout this book. Like, it just was really, really fun to see. Him killing Bittersol, him overcoming his gods, and realizing that mercy is important, and that his ways, his old ways, were really messed up, and his people are basically a doomed species because they are following the whims of a god that doesn't care about them, or gods that don't care about them. I don't know, like, it all came together for me. And then there's this final section, House of Chains, which is the final section for this book, right? And this is probably going to be where I lose some people, because there are plot lines that I've just have completely neglected to talk about. Like, for example, Pearl and Lestara, who have, throughout this entire book, been tracking down Felison before she turned it into Shaik, and her whereabouts. And, you know, by the time they get to this section of the book, they realize, hey, Felison is Shaik. Felison is Shaik, and her sister is on her way to kill her. And none of that is good. None of that is good at all. I mean, it is a messed up situation. But by the time they arrive, obviously the confrontation has begun. Shaik and Tavor and the Marines are about to go to war. And this entire final section, to me, was kind of confusing, because if I understand correctly, the ghosts of the desert, Raraku, come back to life in order to kill the men, specifically the dog killers who killed the chain of dogs back in Deadhouse Gates. They're there to avenge the losses that have been inflicted upon them and return Raraku to what it used to be, which was like a oasis. It was a cool spot, right? It was legit. And so there's this entire ghost army that like runs down a lot of the Whirlwind army, and by the time that anybody realizes that this is going on, it's like the next day, and Tavor is like suited up to go and kill Shaik, and Shaik has now lost her goddess because of Onrak and Tralsengar, if I remember that correctly. I don't think I remember that correctly, but I don't care. I'm moving forward. The goddess dies or disappears somehow, leaving Shaik / Felison with no power. And Shaik is killed by her sister Tavor, and she does not get the revenge she wants. And to me, the way that it is done, I know a lot of people disagree with me here, but I did not care for it. I do not necessarily need a huge final confrontation, but the way that Erikson chooses to write often leaves me not super emotionally attached to characters in general. The characters that I'm emotionally attached to are the bridge burners. And because of that, I found it hard to feel emotional in the way that I wanted to during this sequence, because this is supposed to be this huge moment, this huge showdown between older sister and younger sister, where the older sister, despite making some serious mistakes and some serious miscalculations, was trying to protect her younger sister from a far worse fate. But it turns out that her decision led Felison to suffer, and suffer a lot. And then there's Felison, who is just so hell-bent on revenge. She really thinks that the entire Malazan system just doesn't work anymore. And she has literally let a goddess take over her mind because of how hell-bent on revenge she is. So this should be like a Shakespearean level tragedy, and it's written to be like a Shakespearean level tragedy. But because Erikson chooses to write, and this is not anything against him, this is just how I feel, a plethora of POVs from so many different sides, it sometimes hinders the emotional moments in this series, because it's like, yeah, it's supposed to be this tragedy, but it doesn't read like a tragedy to me personally, because I don't care about Devora. I don't care that she killed her sister, because you haven't given me a reason to care and feel for her in any sort of serious way. And it's the same thing with Felison. Yeah, we read about her in Deadhouse Gates, but for most of Deadhouse Gates, she was understandably an insufferable person to read. It makes sense why she was written the way she was. But at the end of the day, she was an insufferable person to read, who was genuinely very hard to support and follow along compared to the rest of what was going on, especially the Chain of Dogs, right? So it's like, yeah, it's not that I dislike these characters, but I also don't really care about them. So we get this giant emotional conclusion, or what's supposed to be an emotional conclusion, and I feel nothing. I feel completely underwhelmed. It is supposed to be this heartbreaking thing. It is supposed to be like Hamlet times Macbeth times Romeo and Juliet level tragedy, right? And yet, I don't feel a thing. I don't feel a thing. And I know I'm not the only person who felt this way during House of Chains, but I did not feel the emotional impact of this series, this scene at all. Which is why, when I made my spoiler-free review, I said that House of Chains is my least favorite book in this series. There's more than this conclusion is the reason, but yeah, I feel like this entire book has been building up to this clash between these two sisters, and there's so much else going on to support, one side versus the other, and there's so many themes of redemption and revenge, and, is it better to be merciful, or is it better to be powerful, and all of these things, and yet you come to the end, and it's just a whole lot of nothing. I know for some other people, it really hit for them, but for me, it doesn't necessarily take a whole lot of work for me to get emotionally invested in characters, but I just feel like Erikson didn't do enough groundwork here for me to care about either of these two characters. I'm hoping that in the future, I'll come to care about Devora. Obviously, Felison's dead, so she's not coming back, as far as I know. But yeah, this entire end section to me it had a lot of very cool moments. It had the cool Ghost Army moment, but it also just what is supposed to be the great, in my opinion, emotional climax of Deadhouse Gates, and the aftermath of that does not hit. And unfortunately, because of that, this book just didn't work for me. The Malazans overall were not that interesting of a group to follow. The Whirlwind, same thing. Overall, not that interesting to follow. There are a few cool moments, we've got, a few things here and there that I didn't mention because I'm kind of skipping a lot of details, like Heboric becoming the priest or whatever of Feanor, and that was like a really cool moment. But overall, it just feels like this book was, I don't know, it was a little rougher, in my opinion, than the others. This is, for me, definitely my least favorite Malazan book so far. I think it's better written than Gardens of the Moon. It's less disjointed. I think, the prose work is better, the character work is better, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, I had way less fun reading this book than any of the other ones. The emotional moments don't hit for me in general in this series, but this is the least emotionally invested I've been in this series so far. The end of Memories of Ice, I didn't cry or anything, but I was invested. Dead House Gates, Chained Dogs, I was invested. Gardens of the Moon doesn't really have an emotional moment in it necessarily, but I was invested in what was going on. House of Chains, I felt very uninvested in basically all of the plot lines except Karsa, who is great. I mean, I like him so much that I still very much enjoy this book, and I'm hoping that eventually, in like a decade, when I reread this will hit different with more context, or, I'll be at a different place in my life where this will hit different. But yeah, that is my opinion of everything that has happened in House of Chains. Obviously, I skipped a ton of information. There's a lot that goes on. Like, I forgot to mention the fact that there was some dragon that was like chained up, and Pearl and Lestara saw it. I don't even know what that sequence meant, by the way. But obviously, I skipped a lot of stuff because I was trying to make this video shorter, and I was trying to be more succinct with my points, and it's still 40 minutes, so I apologize for that. But if you guys prefer me just ranting and raving about the different sections and what I thought as things happened, if you prefer this format, please let me know. If you guys prefer the other format where I'm a little bit more detailed, hitting it line by line, what's exactly happening, then also please let me know. But yeah. House of Chains just didn't quite hit for me. It's still a good book, but compared to the rest of Malazan, it's less so. This feels like a Crown of Swords for Malazan. And if you're a Wheel of Time fan, you know what I mean. Like, it's just that book in the series where you're like, I can see why people really like this, but it just didn't work for me. This one is obviously, for a lot of people, the most divisive one besides Toll the Hounds, which apparently is like a philosophical book, which is fine with me. But yeah, that's it. I think I gave this like a 8.2 out of 10, and I still feel like that's about where I'm at with this. Maybe my mind will change on reread. Maybe it'll change as I read Midnight Tides and the rest of the series. But yeah, House of Chains to me was just really a lot weaker than the rest of this series. It has a lot of cool moments. It has a lot of nice character moments in there. It has some funny lines. It has some great character interactions and dialogue. But overall, this felt just way, way, way weaker. Especially coming off the back of Memories of Ice, which I almost gave a 10. So it's just, Memories of Ice is like peak fiction, and then it's House of Chains, which is just okay. So yeah, those are my opinions. If you guys disagree, please feel free to comment. This is by no means an objective breakdown. This is just, hey, these things happen, and this is how I felt at the end. And, hopefully that leads to a decent discussion. But I appreciate you guys watching, as always. And until next time, witness.